There is a lawn management philosophy that has been practiced and refined for over 3,000 years. It requires no synthetic fertilizers, no gas-powered mowers, no pre-emergent herbicides, and in the right conditions. No irrigation beyond what falls from the sky. Lawns managed on this philosophy use up to 60% less water than a conventionally managed Kentucky bluegrass lawn, support measurable pollinator populations that conventional turf cannot, and cost homeowners an average of hundreds of dollars less per year in inputs and equipment. Yet right now, across 25 million acres of residential lawn in the United States, a system that was designed to manufacture uniformity and monetize it is making it illegal for you to use most of it. This is the story of the HOA lawn standard. What it is, why it was built, the science it ignores, the methods it suppresses, and what you can actually do about it. Let's find out. Part 1. The standard that rewrote the American yard. To understand why the HOA lawn rule is not just annoying but structurally destructive, you have to understand the thing it replaced. For most of human history, the land immediately surrounding a home was not decorative. It was functional. Roman villa gardens produced herbs, food crops, and soil-stabilizing ground covers in deliberate combination. Medieval European cottages maintained what were called flowery meads, low-growing mixed grass and wildflower swards that were periodically scythed, not continuously mowed, and that supported the insect life that pollinated food crops nearby. These were not weedy accidents. They were managed systems based on centuries of observation about what actually worked in a given soil and climate. In North America, indigenous communities across the eastern woodlands and plains managed their open land through controlled burning, selective grazing, and intentional planting of multi-species ground covers. These were not lawns in any modern sense. They were engineered ecosystems, and they stayed productive for hundreds of years without a single bag of 30-0-4 fertilizer. The monoculture grass lawn, the thing your HOA is enforcing today, is an entirely different invention, and it is a remarkably recent one. Its origins trace to the 17th century estates of the English and French aristocracy. At Versailles, André Le Notre designed immaculate clipped turf parterres using teams of hand scythers and enormous numbers of sheep to maintain uniformity. The message was not agricultural. It was political. A perfectly maintained lawn, producing nothing, wasting enormous labor, announced that its owner was wealthy enough to afford land that didn't have to work for its keep. The lawn was, from its first breath, a status symbol masquerading as a standard. It remained a luxury for 200 years. In early America, front yards were swept dirt, vegetable gardens, or rough native grass. The idea of a decorative lawn for ordinary people only became viable with two inventions: the mechanical reel mower, patented in 1830 by Edwin Budding in Stroud, England, and later the suburban subdivision. After the Second World War, William Levitt's Levittown developments introduced the enforced lawn aesthetic at mass scale. Levitt famously required residents to mow their lawns weekly during the growing season. This was not a suggestion. It was written into the lease, and it was enforced. From there, the template spread. As suburban developments multiplied through the 1950s and 1960s and homeowners associations formalized in the 1970s and 1980s, the Levitt Standard became the HOA Covenant Standard, and the American lawn care industry, worth approximately $47 billion annually according to IBISWorld, grew up alongside it, selling exactly the inputs that a monoculture turf system cannot survive without. That is the history. Now let's talk about the science it ignores. Part 2. What a monoculture lawn actually costs you. The HOA standard lawn is almost always a monoculture, a single species of turf grass, typically Kentucky bluegrass, Bermuda grass, St. Augustine grass, or tall fescue, maintained at a mandated mowing height, kept weed-free, and kept uniformly green. This is presented as natural and normal. It is neither. A monoculture is the least resilient configuration any plant system can be arranged into. Ecologists have understood this for decades. A system with low species diversity has low redundancy. When a single pathogen, pest, or stress condition arrives that targets the dominant species, the entire system fails simultaneously, because there is no alternative plant to fill the gap. This is why monoculture agriculture requires heavy pesticide inputs. The numbers on this are not small. According to the United States Geological Survey, homeowners apply roughly 3 times more pesticide per acre than farmers do. The American lawn system, approximately 40 million acres of turf in total, consumes an estimated 70 to 90 million pounds of pesticides annually, according to estimates from the EPA and various university extension programs. Much of this is pre-emergent herbicide, designed to stop broadleaf plants, what the HOA calls weeds, from germinating in the turf. The problem is that broadleaf plants in a lawn are not weeds. They are the system's immune response. Clover, for example, which appears on most HOA prohibited plant lists, is a nitrogen-fixing legume. Its root system hosts rhizobium bacteria that convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available ammonium, feeding the surrounding grass without any synthetic input whatsoever. A lawn with clover present needs measurably less nitrogen fertilizer. A study published in the journal HOAs found that lawns containing 5 to 10% clover by coverage required significantly reduced nitrogen supplementation compared to pure grass monocultures, while maintaining equivalent visual quality ratings. The HOA bans the clover, then charges you for the fertilizer the clover was providing for free. Dandelions, the single most common HOA violation plant in the United States, have taproots that can reach 10 to 15 inches into compacted soil. Those roots physically break up compaction layers, improving drainage and aeration that compacted clay soils desperately need. They pull minerals from subsoil layers and deposit them in their leaves, which, when they decompose, return those minerals to the surface layer. They bloom in early spring before almost any other plant, providing a critical first nectar source for emerging pollinators. And they are killed at enormous chemical cost specifically because an HOA covenant written in 1987 says they must be. The water consumption data is equally damaging to the standard lawn narrative. The EPA's WaterSense program estimates that landscape irrigation accounts for nearly 1/3 of all residential water use in the United States, approximately 9 billion gallons per day. A significant portion of that goes to lawns. The agency also estimates that as much as 50% of that water is wasted due to overwatering, evaporation, and runoff from improperly managed turf. A conventional Kentucky bluegrass lawn in a semi-arid climate like the American Southwest requires between 24 and 36 inches of supplemental irrigation per year to stay green. Native grass species adapted to those same climates, buffalo grass, blue grama grass, sheep fescue, require between 2 and 8 inches. Many HOA covenants in Phoenix, Las Vegas, and Albuquerque still mandate traditional turf species and prohibit the xeriscaping, or native grass alternatives that municipal water authorities are simultaneously paying residents to install. The HOA forces residents to use 5 times more water and fines them when their water-efficient alternatives don't match the color of a lawn that has no business being green in the desert. Then there is the mowing itself. The Environmental Protection Agency estimated in a 2011 report that gasoline-powered lawnmowers, leaf blowers, and other small off-road engines produce a disproportionate amount of air pollution relative to their size. A conventional gas mower engine produces significant hydrocarbon and nitrogen oxide emissions per hour of operation. There are an estimated 8 million gas-powered lawnmowers in the United States. The HOA mandate for a uniformly mowed lawn drives the use of this equipment continuously through the growing season, and in many warmer states, year-round. This is not an argument against a maintained yard. It is an argument against the specific configuration that HOA covenants mandate, which maximizes inputs, maximizes chemical dependence, and minimizes ecological value, while simultaneously maximizing spending on the industry that helped write the standards in the first place. Part 3. The suppressed methods. There are lawn and landscape management approaches that are proven, documented, and suppressed not because they fail, but because they succeed too well and cost too little. No-mow or low-mow turf blends. The first is the no-mow turf blend. Developed and refined through university extension research, most notably through programs at the University of Minnesota and Purdue University, no-mow blends combine fine fescue species, creeping red fescue, hard fescue, chewings fescue, and sheep fescue. These grasses grow slowly, reaching a natural height of 4 to 6 inches before self-limiting. They do not require weekly mowing. Research from the University of Minnesota found that no-mow fescue plots contain significantly more bee species, including ground-nesting native bees, than conventionally maintained monoculture turf. They require no supplemental irrigation once established in appropriate climates, and they outperform conventional turf in drought conditions. Their annual maintenance cost is a fraction of a conventional lawn. They are prohibited by height rules in the vast majority of HOA covenants across the United States. Clover lawns. Dutch white clover, Trifolium repens. was a standard component of commercial grass seed mixes in the United States from the 1930s through the late 1950s. It was removed from those mixes in the 1960s, not because it performed badly, but because broadleaf herbicides like 2,4-D could not distinguish between clover and broadleaf weeds. To sell herbicide, the industry needed to define clover as a weed. And so it was defined, and so it disappeared from the seed mix. And so the HOA inherited a weed list that included a plant that was, a decade earlier, considered a feature. A clover lawn maintained as a monoculture or in mixture with fine fescues requires essentially no nitrogen fertilization, tolerates foot traffic well, stays green in moderate drought, and provides a continuous nectar source for pollinators from May through October in most temperate zones. Commercial clover seed costs approximately $15 to $20 per 1,000 square feet of coverage. A single season of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer for that same area costs more. Yet in most HOA communities, a clover-dominant lawn generates a violation notice within weeks. Tall grass management zones. Research from multiple university extension programs, including work published through the Natural Areas Journal, documents that allowing grass in portions of a property to grow to 12 to 24 inches in height before periodic cutting creates habitat structure that dramatically increases invertebrate biomass, supports ground nesting birds, and reduces surface runoff by increasing soil organic matter. These are not unkempt fields. They are intentionally managed zones. The practice is documented, peer-reviewed, and widely recommended by wildlife agencies including the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. It is explicitly prohibited in virtually every HOA covenant in the United States, which typically mandate maximum grass heights of 4 to 6 inches across the entire property. Mulched leaf return. The standard HOA expectation, and in many municipalities, the legal requirement, is that fallen leaves be raked, bagged, and removed from the property. This is one of the most ecologically damaging landscape practices in routine use. Fallen leaves are the primary nutrient return pathway for deciduous trees. They decompose on the soil surface, feeding the fungal networks in the top 6 inches of soil, building organic matter, and slowly releasing the carbon, nitrogen, and mineral content the tree extracted from the soil during the growing season. A 2022 study from the National Wildlife Federation documented that leaf litter supports over 400 native moth and butterfly species during their overwintering egg and larvae stages. A property that removes its leaf litter destroys this overwintering habitat entirely. Mulching leaves in place with a mower, shredding them to a thin layer that decomposes within 2 to 3 weeks, is functionally free. Takes approximately the same time as raking, adds measurable organic matter to the soil, and eliminates the need for leaf disposal entirely. Studies from Michigan State University found that mulched leaf return reduced the need for supplemental nitrogen fertilization by up to 25%. Many HOA covenants nonetheless require leaf removal and prohibit any leaf accumulation visible from a street. Native plant ground covers. Creeping thyme, wild ginger, native violets, Pennsylvania sedge, and buffalo grass are all ground cover species native to or well adapted to specific American regions. They require no mowing, minimal or no irrigation once established, and no fertilization. Pennsylvania sedge specifically has been documented in research from the Chicago Botanic Garden as a fully viable lawn replacement in eastern and midwestern climates, requiring no inputs after establishment while supporting soil health comparable to native meadow conditions. These plants are not weeds. They are documented, researched, commercially available ground covers. They are prohibited by covenant in the majority of HOA communities because they do not match the defined visual standard, which was, as we have established, inherited from the aesthetic of 17th century European aristocracy. Part 4. How the system enforces itself. Understanding why these methods are suppressed requires understanding how an HOA actually operates as a legal and financial structure. Homeowners associations are corporations. They are registered, in most states, as non-profit corporations, but they operate as any corporation does, with a board, bylaws, governing documents, and the power to levy assessments and enforce compliance. The covenants, conditions, and restrictions, the CC and RS, that govern your lawn are not municipal law. They are private contract. When you buy a home in an HOA community, you sign a contract agreeing to be bound by those covenants. The enforcement mechanism is the fine. HOA fines in the United States are not trivial. The Community Associations Institute, the HOA Industries Trade Organization, reports that the average HOA fine for a covenant violation runs between $50 and $200 per violation per day in some communities. In a documented 2019 case in Colorado, a homeowner faced fines that accumulated to over $10,000 over a dispute involving an authorized plant species in a front yard border. In Texas and several other states, an HOA can place a lien on a home for unpaid fines and assessments, and in certain circumstances, foreclose on that lien. The violation system also creates a self-reinforcing social compliance dynamic. HOA boards in many communities employ management companies that conduct regular drive-through inspections. Neighbors are also frequently empowered to report violations. The result is a surveillance structure that applies social pressure beyond the financial penalty. And critically, the covenants themselves are rarely updated. CC and RS, written in 1985, govern the landscape practices of communities in 2025. They contain no provision for the drought conditions that have changed the water economics of the American Southwest since they were written. They contain no provision for the pollinator decline data that has accumulated over the same period. They contain no provision for the documented soil health research that has fundamentally revised our understanding of what a healthy lawn actually requires. They are static documents enforcing a mid-20th century aesthetic standard against a 21st century ecological and hydrological reality. The lawn care industry maintains a deep interest in that stasis. The landscaping and lawn care industry in the United States generates approximately $50 billion in annual revenue. A transition away from monoculture turf to low-input native alternatives would not eliminate that industry, but it would fundamentally compress the maintenance and input cycles that make residential lawn care contracts profitable. Pre-emergent herbicide applications, synthetic fertilizer programs, aeration and overseeding packages, irrigation system service contracts. These are the revenue structure of the residential lawn care business model. They are all required by the monoculture standard. They are all unnecessary in a properly designed native or low-input lawn system. Part 5. The regulatory layer. Beyond the private contract of the HOA, there is a separate layer of municipal ordinance that compounds the problem. Tall grass ordinances exist in cities and counties across the United States. These are local laws, not HOA covenants, that mandate maximum grass and weed heights, typically at 4 to 12 inches, and authorize municipal code enforcement officers to issue fines and, in some cases, to cut the property and bill the owner for the service. In many municipalities, these ordinances predate the current body of ecological research that distinguishes between unmanaged neglect and intentional LOMO or meadow management. As of 2023, several U.S. cities and states have begun reforming these ordinances in light of the pollinator research. Minneapolis passed a pollinator-friendly lawn ordinance in 2021 that allows residents to maintain a registered natural lawn, with plants up to 18 inches in height without violation. Maryland passed a statewide law in 2022 prohibiting the application of certain synthetic fertilizers containing phosphorus to turf between November and March, recognizing the Chesapeake Bay water quality data that links residential fertilizer runoff to hypoxic dead zones. In 2023, the California legislature passed AB 1572, which prohibits the installation of non-functional turf, ornamental grass that is not used for recreation or other functional purposes, in commercial and institutional applications. This was followed by significant expansion of municipal turf removal rebate programs, offering homeowners up to $3 per square foot of grass removed, and replaced with drought-tolerant landscaping. But in most of the country, the municipal ordinance and the HOA covenant exist as overlapping compliance structures, and neither has been updated to reflect current scientific understanding of what actually constitutes a well-managed landscape. The result is a homeowner caught between a private contract requiring a monoculture lawn, a municipal ordinance setting height limits, and a body of ecological and hydrological research showing that both requirements are causing measurable environmental damage. Part 6. What you can actually do. This is not a helpless situation. The HOA system is powerful, but it is not unbeatable. And the legal and practical landscape around lawn management is shifting in ways that create real pathways for homeowners who want to manage their land more intelligently. Know your documents. The first step is reading your actual CC and RS and any accompanying landscape guidelines. Most homeowners in HOA communities have not read these documents in full. What you will typically find is that the prohibitions are more specific and more limited than the enforcement culture around them suggests. Many HOA covenants prohibit weeds without defining the term. Many prohibit overgrown vegetation without specifying a measurement. These vague terms have been successfully challenged in HOA dispute proceedings. Pay specific attention to whether your state has a law that restricts HOA authority over certain landscape choices. As of 2024, a growing number of states have enacted what are called right to garden or landscape freedom statutes. Florida, for example, has Florida Statute 720.3075, which prohibits HOA restrictions that prevent the installation of Florida-friendly landscaping. Defined by state law as landscaping that uses low-maintenance plants and practices that protect the environment, conserve water, and reduce waste. This statute explicitly supersedes conflicting HOA covenants. A Florida homeowner can legally install native plants, reduce turf coverage, and eliminate synthetic irrigation over HOA objection if the installation meets the Florida-friendly standard. California has Civil Code Section 4735, which prohibits HOA enforcement actions against homeowners who reduce their turf or eliminate irrigation in response to water shortage conditions declared by a local agency or the state during any declared drought state, and California has been in varying degrees of drought emergency for most of the last decade. This statute effectively prevents HOA enforcement of mandatory turf coverage rules. Texas has Section 202.007 of the Property Code, which prevents HOAs from prohibiting the use of water-conserving landscaping or drought-resistant plants. This was specifically enacted to prevent HOAs in Texas municipalities, where municipal water authorities are actively paying homeowners to remove grass, from simultaneously fining them for doing so. Colorado, Nevada, and several other western states have enacted similar provisions. Document the ecology. If you want to maintain a clover lawn, a loam-fescue blend, a native plant border, or a mulched leaf return system, document it as a managed system. Take photographs. Keep records. Write a landscape management plan, a one-page document describing what you are planting, why, and how you are managing it. This transforms an apparent act of non-compliance into a documented intentional landscape practice, which changes the legal and social dynamic in any dispute proceeding. Many HOA dispute boards are comprised of neighbors, not horticulturalists. A homeowner who can present peer-reviewed research, university extension documentation, and a clear management plan will almost always prevail over a vague covenant violation notice in a formal dispute or small claims proceeding. Engage the process. HOA covenants are not immutable. They can be amended. The amendment process varies by community, but most require a petition signed by a defined percentage of homeowners, typically 50 to 67%, followed by a vote. In many communities, the percentage of homeowners who are aware of the ecological and financial case against monoculture lawns has grown substantially in the last 5 years. Introducing a landscape amendment to your HOA's governing documents, one that explicitly permits native plant ground covers, clover, pollinator gardens, and loam-turf in defined zones, is a viable long-term strategy that permanently changes the rules rather than fighting them violation by violation. Start in the back. Most HOA enforcement authority is concentrated on front yard appearance, because that is what is visible from the street and subject to the uniformity standard. Backyard landscape requirements are typically far less restrictive. A properly designed backyard native landscape can function as a proof of concept, building your knowledge, reducing your water and input costs, and generating the track record of a managed system rather than a neglected one. The practical starting point: fine fescue conversion. If you are in a climate suitable for cool season grasses and you want to reduce your lawn inputs immediately within most HOA constraints, converting from Kentucky bluegrass or tall fescue monoculture to a hard fescue or sheep fescue dominant mix is the lowest friction starting point. These grasses look similar to conventional turf when maintained at standard mowing heights, tolerate the same traffic, and establish from seed. But they require significantly less water, tolerate lower soil fertility, and require fewer mowing events per season. In many cases, they pass visual inspection against an HOA standard while substantially reducing your inputs. Hard fescue seed is commercially available through garden centers and online retailers. Overseeding an existing lawn in early fall, when the soil temperature has dropped below 65 degrees Fahrenheit, is the standard establishment method. No complete renovation is required. Pollinator border strategy. Most HOA covenants regulate turf height but are less prescriptive about defined garden beds. A defined bed, edged with a physical barrier, planted with documented native pollinator plants, typically does not trigger the same enforcement response as grass height violations, because it reads visually as intentional rather than neglected. Native plants like coneflowers, black-eyed Susans, wild bergamot, and asters are commercially available, deeply researched, and attractive by any reasonable aesthetic standard. They support documented pollinator populations. They require no irrigation once established in appropriate climates, and many of them can be installed within existing HOA bed footprints without triggering a covenant review at all. Conclusion: the lawn is not the problem. The standard is. There is nothing wrong with a well-maintained yard. A managed outdoor space that is safe, comfortable, usable, and aesthetically considered is a reasonable thing for any community to expect from its members. The problem is not the expectation of maintenance. The problem is a specific, mid-20th century standard that was built not on horticultural science but on a status symbol borrowed from European aristocracy and enforced through a legal structure that the lawn care industry had every incentive to perpetuate. That standard mandates the most input-intensive, most water-intensive, most chemically dependent, and ecologically least productive configuration of a residential yard that exists, and it finances itself through the fines of the homeowners it governs. The data is not ambiguous. Native and low-input lawn systems use less water. They require fewer chemical inputs. They support measurable pollinator and invertebrate populations. They cost homeowners less on an annualized basis, and they are increasingly protected by state law from HOA enforcement. The 35 million homeowners currently living under HOA jurisdiction in the United States did not design the system. Most of them inherited it with the purchase of their home. But the system is not static. The law is changing. The science is documented. And the tools to work within, around, and ultimately against the uniformity mandate exist and are available right now. A lawn that costs you nothing to maintain, gives back to the soil, supports the insects that feed the birds, and doesn't send you a violation notice, that is not an impossibility. It is a 3,000-year-old practice that the 20th century decided was too simple to sell. And if understanding how the systems we live inside actually work, and how to get your land back from them, is the kind of thing that matters to you, then subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure this kind of knowledge keeps being found.